AlphaZero's attacking chess was the first topic I covered in my video analysis on DeepMind's artificial intelligence system. As you know, AlphaZero taught itself to play chess and has come to conclusions about our beloved board game that we humans can learn a lot from. Today's video will examine how well AlphaZero understands positional play. It's all gonna be about long-term strategic plans, maneuvers, and even positional sacrifices. Are you ready for it? Let's begin. This is yet another game of AlphaZero against Stockfish 8 from one of their matches. AlphaZero plays d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, b6, the Queen's Indian defense. g3 is a classical setup against the Queen's Indian. I'm not going to explain much about the opening stage. I want to highlight the critical moments and also to focus on a comparison on how AlphaZero's play compares to other engines and to the human way of playing chess. So I'm going to stop very soon after knight a6, rook fd1. From here on, we are going to focus on the game move by move. If you want to look at the opening stage slower, then make sure to check out the entire game. I will try to link it in the description if I can find it online. So, rook fd1. What you can see in this position is that white is putting a lot of pressure on the d5 pawn. That is our target. Already some possible threats are in the air. D takes c5. That would open up the d5 for the rook, and three pieces of white are attacking the d5 pawn. This g2 bishop 2 could join the attack, as well as a potential pin after d takes c5, knight takes e4, and if the queen stays on d8, that would be a piece up for white. So lots of things are going on already in this moment with this pressure on the d file. Therefore, black plays c4, queen c2, we gotta move the queen, knight b4, and queen c1, queen d7, and here comes a typical AlphaZero move, a flank pawn move, h4. AlphaZero, just like Ginger GM Simon Williams, loves Harry the h-pawn. Rook a c8, a3. We gotta chase away this knight because it's taking away important squares from white. Knight takes c3 was included first, and then Stockfish moves the knight back to c6. Queen b1. I just want to draw a little triangle. The queen started out on d1, went to b3, came back to c2, went to c1, and now to b1. Why, you might wonder? Well, remember that we were focusing on the d5 pawn? It is still our target. Believe me, it is still our target. This b1 queen will be very useful a couple of moves later. Rook c e8 and rook e1. This is a prophylactic move since black has just moved the rook to the e file, which is a semi-open file for black. It puts pressure on the e2 pawn, and white is now ready to defend this pawn. It wasn't hanging yet, but prophylaxis is important in chess, and AlphaZero knows it, even though it was never taught. It had to learn it by itself. And yes, I'm gonna call it a nit. I know the pronoun thing was a discussion in my previous video. I talked to the authors of Game Changer, the book that has just been released about AlphaZero, and they said that we gotta stick to it, even though he is tempting to. So, it. Knight a5. And it is clear that black is aiming to play on the queen side. You see that black has a pawn majority on the queen side. It's 4 versus 3. Now what shall white do? Well, play on the flank where it has more active pieces, that is the king side. So AlphaZero goes knight g5. Threatening mate in 1 is always cool. f5. Oh well, Stockfish has realized that there was a mate threat. Do you think that this is a problem? That now there's no mate on h7? What is our knight doing on g5? Well, no, every move has its consequences. So the pawn push f5, yes, it prevents the mate on h7, but it weakens the e5 square. So AlphaZero comes back immediately to f3 and is pointing out that the e5 square has now become a weakness. There's no pawn that can protect the e5 square. As you can see, both the d and the f pawns have been pushed, which means that the e5 square is an outpost for white's pieces. That is a very important strategic term, an outpost. Black plays bishop f6 in order to meet knight e5 with bishop takes e5. But AlphaZero is not in a hurry occupying the outpost on e5. It plays rook to a2. Yes, this is a rook maneuver, and a very nice one, because the rook on a1 was not doing anything. And the queen on b1, well, we don't know why yet, but it's cool on b1. So white doesn't want to move the queen away from b1, but without moving the queen, how can you activate the rook? This is the way. Rook a2, and then the rook can come to the b file. Where on the b file? Well, maybe to b5, maybe to attack the d5 pawn. Remember that it is our target. It doesn't look like a big target at the moment, but believe me, in the future, you're gonna see. Rook a2, h6, protecting the g5 square, just in case, and now a4, expanding a little further on the queen side. Stockfish plays queen e6, and according to Stockfish 8, this position is about 0, 0, 0. I analyzed the game with Stockfish 8 because this game was played by Stockfish 8, so I am aware of the new versions of Stockfish and I have them. But this game was played by Stockfish 8 because back then that was the version that was the newest, the best version of Stockfish at the time of the match. So I did analyze this with Stockfish 8 to contrast what Stockfish 8 thinks about these positions and how AlphaZero plays instead of Stockfish and the moves that Stockfish suggests. So in this position, Stockfish thinks it's just equal and it doesn't really come up with any concrete plan. Certainly not with this plan, king to h2. This move, yes, it appears on the list of Stockfish 8, but it's nowhere near the top choices. And basically, king h2 is a very mysterious move. Like, why would you want your king on h2, right? What's the purpose? Soon we're gonna figure it out. Bishop to c8. The position is very closed. There's only one semi-open file for black, that is the e file, and the semi-open file for white, that is the b file. So it's not easy to do anything. That's why there's time for lengthy maneuvers, such as king h2, preparing for, ta-dam, ready for it? Rook to h1. Yes, this was the master plan. King to h2, just so that we can hide our rook on h1. What's the plan? Don't ask me. Actually, I know, but I'm not gonna tell you yet. Wait for it. Knight to c6, and now h5. Here we finally start understanding the brilliancy behind AlphaZero's moves. If black plays queen f7 now, attacking the h5 pawn, which is kind of weak on h5, isn't it weak? White can simply play bishop d6, because this pawn, even though it's captured with a check, it does not matter. We're gonna move the king, and now both the queen and the rook are hanging at the same time. White is winning material. Okay, cool, Anna. But what if black plays, instead of queen takes h5, a move that prevents the capture of the rook, such as bishop to e7? In that case, AlphaZero would have taken on e7, rook takes e7, and now knight to h4, heading toward the g6 square. If the pawn is captured, cool, there's another hanging pawn, and the more important one than the h-pawn. This move is winning a piece and the game. If, instead of bishop e7, black plays knight to e7, remember, every move has its drawbacks. So every move has a consequence. In this case, the knight used to protect the a5 square, and since it's not on c6 anymore, white can play a5, opening up the b and a files for its heavy pieces. B takes a5, rook takes a5, queen takes h5 check. I'm just analyzing a line that could have been played just to demonstrate how dangerous this position is even if the h5 pawn is captured with a check, and even if in this very moment black is a pawn up, remember how much AlphaZero cares about material. It doesn't care about sacrificing material. Here, white can take on a7 if it wants to. But after queen e6, the bishop is hanging and the pawn on e2 is also in the air, so this may not be the strongest move. I think after queen f7, in such a position, AlphaZero would have played e3. Prophylaxis, making sure that this pawn will not be hanging. This is a very healthy and solid pawn structure. And next move, he's threatening to take on a7. But if it doesn't capture the pawn back immediately, no worries at all, because white has really active pieces and lots of initiative, which matters a lot to AlphaZero. So this was just to demonstrate that after h5, queen f7 could attack the pawn, but it doesn't do much harm to white's position. And all this was needed. First king h2, then to bring the rook to the h file, so that this rook from h1 indirectly is defending the h5 pawn. Imagine if we wanted to push h5 earlier, there was no piece that could defend this pawn. So, h5. Great move, but it all started with king h2. And we are not done. The plan is not over. King h8. And now, are you ready? This is, I believe, the most shocking move in this game. Okay, maybe it's competing with rook h1. Rook h1 is one of the most shocking moves of this game. And the next really impressive move is knight to g1. You heard it well, you saw it well. Knight to g1, what on earth? That is the question. I think the reaction of Grandmaster Alexander Fier to this move and to this plan was the best. How he described it in a Facebook post, and I would like to read it out to you. He wrote, "And here AlphaZero comes with the obvious plan to play king h2, rook h1, and then knight g1, putting the pieces for the next game, since this one is already winning." The position is not winning, but I thought it was really funny how the Brazilian Grandmaster, who of course as well knows that this position is not yet winning, but he definitely thought that these were really funny moves too. And yes, it does look like white is setting back the position to the initial position, ready for the next game. So here we go, knight g1, exclamation mark. What's the point of this move? Well, the knight was nicely placed on f3, but now it's heading toward a different square. Can you guess which square? Where's this maneuver heading to? Pause the video if you want to figure it out. In the meantime, I'm gonna continue with the game. Queen f7, attacking the pawn. And now that we have managed to shelter the king in a funny way, there are no squares available for the king except for the h3 square. We can't move the king away to protect the h5 pawn, but we can play bishop to f3. Now that the f3 square is free, here comes the bishop. So white is regrouping its pieces. Now the bishop is on f3, defending the h5 pawn, and this knight, it does not want to go back to f3, but it will go to, can you guess it? But it will go to, well, h3. And it will not stay on h3. It's heading toward the f4 square, because from f4, it can jump to the weak g6 square. That would be a fork. And also from f4, it is attacking the weak d5 pawn. Remember the d5 pawn, right? So, knight h3. Black plays king g8. The problem with black's position is that Stockfish doesn't really have an active plan here. It has to wait for white to do something. Here comes the next typical AlphaZero move. Yes, the knight is heading toward the f4 square, but there's a piece on the f4 square. So we gotta regroup the pieces once again, shuffle it around a little. This bishop has to find a different square, a different place. Where could this bishop be active? Well, for now, AlphaZero says, I love retreating moves. Let's just play bishop c1, putting back the pieces to its starting position, right? The knight was on g1 just a move ago, the rook is still on h1, and now we place the bishop on c1. They are hanging out on the back rank. Bishop c1, now ready to jump to f4 with the knight. Rook f to e8. And here, knight f4 is a good move. And another good move is queen b5. This is what AlphaZero played here. Attacking the knight on c6 and putting pressure on the d5 pawn. Bishop b7 and rook d1. Not in a hurry with knight f4. So the move order, you might wonder why wait with knight f4. But if knight f4, black has the possibility of playing bishop g5. So AlphaZero just makes sure that it plays knight f4 in the most precise moment. Rook d1, because now that the pawn on h4 is protected by the f3 bishop, we no longer need the rook on h1. It was useful back then, but now we need a new place for that rook. There's not an open file for the rooks at the moment, so rook d1 seems to be logical, just to, hang out on the central files, even if they are not open yet. Rook d1, knight a5, and once again, trademark AlphaZero move comes back to b1 with the queen. Why, you might wonder. The reason is we gotta think about the opponent's plans as well. It's not a one-sided game. Knight a5, what is the purpose of this move? What is it that Stockfish wants? Well, Stockfish would like to jump to b3 with that knight and say that the queen on b5 might feel a little awkward, running out of space. It's almost trapped if the knight lands on b3. So AlphaZero comes up with a prophylactic move, preventing that the queen would get locked up on b5. Bishop c8 protects the hanging f5 pawn, and here is the moment to play knight to f4. Put more pressure on the d5 square, and also, if we want to, we can jump to g6. Bishop to g5. Black wants to eliminate this beautiful knight that we have on f4. Do you think that AlphaZero allowed this capture on f4, or it played something else? You can pause the video if you want to think about it. AlphaZero does not want to allow the capture on f4, plays knight g6, and offers the trade of bishops. Without the dark squared bishops, this e5 square is horribly weak. And guess what? There's not much choice for black anymore, because if Stockfish goes back to f6 with the bishop, white can play bishop f4, and next move bishop e5 or knight e5, depending on the position. But I would want to play bishop e5, aim to trade the dark squared bishop and keep the e5 square for my knight. So what happened in the game was knight g6, bishop takes c1. Stockfish admits that this position is inferior already because of the holes on the dark squares. Now that the trade of the bishops happened, the dark squared bishops are off of the board. This e5 square is a huge hole in black's camp, and that's an outpost. It means that the knight is gonna jump to e5 and enjoy this position a lot. Bishop to e6 and knight e5. We can consider this as the first stage of the game has been completed. Okay, the first couple of stages, because king h2, rook h1, knight g1, that has been a lengthy plan. But positional play is all about having mini plans. And this is what I described in one of my oldest videos that I recorded for Chess24 about endgames. I'm gonna link it in the description below if you want to check it out. In that video, I'm referring to mini plans. Do you know the strategic game Risk? So you go on missions in Risk. You need to conquer a country, a neighboring country, then another country, then another country, before you can have an entire continent or before you can win the game. And in chess too, I think of positional chess and plenty of the endgame positions as a risk game. Not because there's any risk, but because you need to go on small missions, accomplish smaller missions step by step to build up a bigger plan. Here you don't need to know what will be the winning plan, but what you should do is make progress all the time, step by step. No matter how small is the improvement that you make in the position, as long as you are advancing toward a better and better position, improving your pieces, improving your pawn structure, gaining more space, creating weaknesses in the opponent's camp, slowly but surely. So here we go, let's improve the position a little further. This rook was not doing much on a2, let's improve the rook. And it is, yes, heading toward the b5 square because the d5 pawn is still a target. Knight to b7 and rook b5. The knight went back to a5. It's not easy to play this position as black. I wouldn't be happy about it for sure. But hey, talking about small missions and accomplishing a plan step by step, what shall be the next stage that we need to achieve in order to improve our position here as white? The knight is very well placed on e5. The rook is perfect on b5, putting pressure on the d5 pawn as well as the f3 bishop. So what other pieces can we improve? What shall be the next piece to improve? I think this queen on c1 is not well placed. We can improve it. The d1 rook 2 we can improve, but not at the moment. There are no open files. It's easier to improve the queen. So a queen move, a queen maneuver makes a lot more sense here. Queen to f4. This queen is heading toward the d5 pawn too. You may or may not believe me, but it's gonna be about attacking that pawn too. Knight to b3. Black is trying to improve its position, but this is the only active piece that black has. That's the best piece. It has locked up the rook, and you may wonder, why does white allow the rook to be locked up when we said earlier when the queen was on b5 that AlphaZero didn't want to allow knight b3, trapping the piece on b5? Well, it is very concrete. In this position, it is white to move, and AlphaZero plays the move it prepared with queen f4. Knight to g6, offering a trade of queens. Because if the queens are traded, queen takes f4, knight takes f4, this pawn is gonna drop. And black can't play a6 anymore, the b6 pawn will be in the air. The queen on c7 was defending the b6 pawn, so a6 could have been possible. But after knight g6 and the trade of queens, black is not in time to try to bother the rook on b5. The pawn falls. And I promised you that the queen on f4 was going to collaborate in the attack of the d5 pawn, but not in the way you may have thought. It was because the knight has now finally made it back to f4, attacking the d5 pawn, and there's no defense. If bishop d7, simply rook takes d5. So this is a very bad line for black. It's better to play queen c6 as it happened in the game. And now AlphaZero does attack the pawn on d5 with the queen. Bishop is attacking, rook and queen. All we are missing is the knight coming back to f4 in the right moment, and then the d5 pawn shall drop. Let's see if it's gonna happen in the near future. Also, by the way, when you place your queen on the same file where your opponent's rook is, you've got to be very careful. You should watch out for all sorts of discovered attacks. So now I'm just gonna leave this arrow, the rook and the queen on the same file, and make sure that when you play a move like this, there's no discovered check. If this bishop could give a check to our king, we would lose the queen. And you should also calculate what happens if bishop f7. Well, we have knight e7 fork. What happens if bishop to d7? We can take on d5 with a check, and the black queen is also hanging. So nothing is happening to the queen. What about the rook? Because the rook is funny on b5. This position is quite concrete. a6. Then we can move to the one and only square that is available for the rook, the b4 square. And if a5, we simply go back to b5. And this rook actually is very well placed on b5. Funnily enough, because there's no piece that could attack it. Bishop d7 is never a possibility because of the hanging d5 pawn. So this is quite a big advantage already for white if black starts pushing the pawn to a6 and a5. After queen e5, Stockfish played queen to d7, and here another prophylactic move by AlphaZero, e3, because in some positions that pawn on e2 could have been hanging, especially if you imagine a scenario where we will win the d5 pawn, but there will be multiple trades on d5, and that will mean that the e file opens up for the black rook. It's better to be ready for it and play e3. The knight goes back to a5. As I said, this is a very sad position for black. Not easy to play it because there isn't really an active plan. Bishop to g2, a little shuffling around once again, and this has, once again, a purpose. Because d5, yes, that has been our main target, but there's another pawn that is a little bit vulnerable. Both the d5 and the f5 pawns can be targets, and the bishop maneuver, bishop to g2, bishop to h3 is coming up next. Knight to b7, and now rook a1. This rook has first made it to h1 and now to a1. And apart from the fact that we know that this rook really loves the corner for whatever reason, what else is the purpose of this move? The pawn on a4 was not hanging, and this is certainly not an open file. We can't push a5 because the knight is covering the a5 square, so why would AlphaZero want the rook to be on a1? Well, I have seen the game, so I know what's the purpose. But believe me, when I looked at this game first, I didn't understand the move at all. Not at first sight, maybe not at second sight either. This is a very mysterious move, and we're gonna see it in a couple of moves. What was the idea behind? King h7, and now knight f4. This is a forcing line. White is attacking the d5 pawn with 4 pieces, so it's about to fall. But knight f4 also means that white has trapped its own queen, and bishop g8 can be played. Stockfish goes bishop g8. There's no square for the queen, but this is what AlphaZero wanted. Now, after bishop g8, it goes rook takes d5. Some calculation was needed, but this is a positional exchange sacrifice. Bishop takes d5 and queen takes d5. It is simplifying the position into an endgame where AlphaZero has a minor piece and a pawn for a rook. That is not enough compensation if we add up 3 plus 1, that is 4, versus 5. 5 points or 5 pawns is the rook. But as you know, AlphaZero doesn't use the same value system for the pieces. It has never been taught how much is a piece, what is the value of each piece. It learned chess by playing against itself, and it sees chess in a very different way. Therefore, this position for AlphaZero, with all the activity, space that it has, and the initiative, it is worth it. It is enough compensation. I wanted to mention here that I did look at Stockfish 8. I was curious if Stockfish 8 would suggest this exchange sacrifice. Of course, after bishop g8, this is the only move. Rook takes d5 has to be played, otherwise the queen is lost. But here, after king h7, knight f4, going for this exchange sacrifice is actually the second move suggested by Stockfish, which is pretty good. What is funny that in this position, with the rook on a1, Stockfish does see knight f4 and rook takes d5, but it does not suggest rook a1, and therefore it didn't see the plan of rook a1, knight f4, and rook takes d5 before AlphaZero placed the rook on a1. So here we go. Once again, rook a1, king h7, knight f4, bishop g8, forcing line, rook takes d5, positional, exchange, sacrifice, just like Tigran Petrosyan would have done it. Knight to d6, not trading, because if black takes on d5, queen takes d5, bishop takes d5, the knight and the pawn are hanging, so knight d6 has to be played, and king g2, for instance, improving the king, defending the f2 pawn. In case of knight e4, white can simply take on c4, knight takes c3, and then play bishop to f7, because the f5 pawn is going to drop. Bishop check, and taking on f5. Now it would be a piece and 2 pawns for the rook. Even mathematically, it's enough compensation. And if you look at these pawns, what kind of pawns they are connected passed pawns. So this is a winning position for white already, even if the material is roughly equal. After queen takes d5, knight d6 was played in the game, and now bishop h3, because remember that bishop g2 was for a reason. Yes, now we are attacking the other weakness, the f5 pawn. Black can barely move in this position without worsening its position. Stockfish plays rook e7, but its pieces are really tied up to the defense of these pawns and simply lacking space and activity. As usual, AlphaZero takes it all. More space, more active pieces, and having the initiative. Knight g6, attacking the rook and heading toward, well, once again, the e5 square. Rook f7, knight e5, fork, but black is not losing material. Queen b7 was of course foreseen by Stockfish. Bishop g2, now queen takes d5 is forced, bishop takes d5, and rook c7. Here, for now, black has managed to defend everything, the c4 pawn, the f5 pawn, and we can't start advancing the passed pawn that we have, the d4 pawn. But remember, small steps. Next mission, we gotta improve the king, because in endgames you need to have an active king. King g2, bringing the king closer to the center and also protecting the f2 pawn. Knight e4, and now AlphaZero simply goes for the trade on e4 to simplify the position. F takes e4, and a very important move, pawn to f3. After f3 and this trade on f3, what we have achieved, apart from bringing the king closer, so activating the king as it is a very important piece in endgames, we have also managed to create another passed pawn. Now we have 2 passed pawns, and they are also connected passed pawns. Rook e7, knight g6, attacking the rook and creating space for these pawns to start advancing soon. It's coming soon. Rook b7 was played in the game. If rook f7 check, it's tempting, but it doesn't do anything. The knight can come back to f4, and then the pawns start rolling. Mentioning rolling, it reminds me of Anish Giri's tweet. Yeah, that kind of rolling. So instead of rook f7 check in the game, rook b7 was played. Black is trying to create some counterplay on the queen side by opening up the b file. It's a good plan, but it's a slow one. As slow as the turtle. e4, b5, 8 takes b5, rook takes b5. Now also white has gained the a5. But do you think that AlphaZero cared about this a7 pawn? It takes a tempo to capture this pawn on a7. And I'm a pawn grabber. I would have definitely considered taking. Actually, it doesn't work. If rook takes a7, rook b3, careful. Always have in mind the opponent's plan. The c3 pawn would drop, and that's a very important pawn for white because it is blocking the c4 pawn. If black can create a c-passed pawn, Stockfish would have chances. We shouldn't give up the c3 pawn. So how to prevent the capture of this pawn? Knight f4. The knight is coming back to protect the c3 pawn, and at the same time it defends the h5 pawn. But I'm telling you, it is the c3 pawn that is more valuable here. Rook b3 and knight e2. If black goes back to b5, of course AlphaZero was not going to repeat the position. White can simply play d5. Remember, they see me rolling. After knight e2, Stockfish played rook a8. And here we go, e5, a5, and d5. Let's just go rolling. a4 and d6, a3, d7. Just advancing the passed pawns. That's what you should do with passed pawns, right? e6 is a possibility here, but it's even more precise to play what AlphaZero did. rook to d1, threatening to promote immediately. So black has to go back to b8 with the other rook. And here we go. Let's go rolling. e6, king f8. And now that the black king has taken control of the e7 square, we need one more piece to have the pass pawns promote. We've got the rook, but the knight could do better. So AlphaZero plays knight d4, and actually it's such a strong move that Stockfish resigned here. The threat, well, let me just present it with a variation. If a2, for instance, threatening to promote with a1, knight c6. And it doesn't matter if black promotes because white will take it. And, well, anything wins. d8, knight takes b8, e7. I think e7 would be the prettiest because that is, they see me rolling. What did you think of this game? The positional style of AlphaZero, the lengthy maneuvers, strategic plans, small missions to accomplish for a bigger plan, and then this positional piece sacrifice, an exchange sacrifice on d5, with the mysterious moves, the rook moves to the corner. Mentioning mysterious rook moves to the corner, the last thing I wanted to point out in this game, that remember when AlphaZero, back in the day, played rook to a1. Let me just go back to that moment, and I'm gonna tell you what move it was. Rook a1 was played on move 45, 45. And then this rook stayed on a1. It stayed on a1 until AlphaZero played rook to d1 to support the passed pawn. So here, after d7, king g8, the rook is still on a1. Remember, move 45, rook a1 was played, and the rook stayed on a1 until move 67. That is over 20 moves. For 20 moves, the rook was kept on a1. And you wonder why it was well placed there? Well, AlphaZero just understood the position so much deeper than we can. How did you like these funny rook moves and the game itself? Let me know in the comments below, and also if you would like me to cover more AlphaZero games. The book, as I said, Game Changer by Matthew Sadler and Natasha Regan, has just come out because I'm actually recording this video on January the 25th, the day when the book has been released. I can't wait to read it. I'm not in Vaikansé anymore, so I couldn't get my copy yet, but I've ordered it, it's on its way, and I can't wait to read it. I'm going to tell you more about the book once I have it. And in the meantime, do check out more of AlphaZero's games. I'm gonna link it in the description below, as well as the other game I covered by AlphaZero, AlphaZero's Attacking Chess. Everything you can find in the description below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up if you like the content, and subscribe to my channel for more videos. I'm pretty sure I'm gonna be covering more AlphaZero games, perhaps also Lila Zero games, and just in general, quite some chess content and also non-chess content, everything that I'm interested in. See you soon in another video. Bye bye. I almost forgot, do check out the Twitch clip of Magnus Carlsen, the world champion himself, talking about AlphaZero and how close he thinks he can get to the way AlphaZero plays chess. It's linked in the description below with all the other links I have mentioned, and now I am actually signing off.